Hello. Shiny and shining. That's because it's hot, you know. So why are we not dead yet? Because you're laughing, you know. That's a major question, you know. Just ask around. Ask about medical histories of people around you, your colleagues. Think about your families. Most of us would not have lived up until now. I would be dead. My partner, I would haven't even met him. And my daughter, she's 2.5 years, and probably she would be dead as well, you know, without antibiotics. Not speaking about all the preventable diseases with vaccines, for example. So over the last 150 years, since the dawn of modern medicine as we understand it, actually, our lifetime doubled from 40 years to 80 years. And that's a lot, if you think about this. And it seems like a trend will continue, and it is expected that people who are born now, our children and the children of theirs, their life expectancy will be above 100 years. So what does that mean for us? What does it mean for society? Because we see that, you know, we are getting all these new technologies such as robotics, artificial intelligence, big data, all these buzzwords that we hear around actually contributing to increasing our lifetime. And of course, it's not just good things. We will encounter challenges as well, because if we think that we will live until 100 or 125, which is expected life expectancy with a set of genes that we have, or maybe up to 200, if we are able to knock out aging genes as scientists are able to do with mice, for example, and get immortal mice, then that doesn't make much sense to leave the workforce at 60 or 70 years old, you know, and we have all this extra workforce and all this extra experience that we need to incorporate it. Our lifespan is increasing, but is our quality of end of life increasing at the same speed? You know, are we still healthy enough to be active participants of the society? And if not, then it will be expensive. We will need a lot of care, we will need a lot of resources for healthcare, and it might be a huge burden for society. So living long is not enough. We have to live healthy. And even then, there will be implications for the society. You know, if we live for 100 years, if we work for 100 years, maybe we can have not one full career, maybe we can have 3. You know, maybe we can change it once in 30 years. What does it mean for the families? You know, maybe families can work, you know, some of the family is working, others are taking a break, then other part of the family is working. And insurance, medical care, long-term care, family dynamics, everything will be affected. So, well, now we still don't have a magical pill that can prevent our aging or reverse our aging. We are living longer and longer, and today's innovative technologies are on the path of getting us to live over 100 years. So today, with a really great set of panels, I'm really looking forward for a discussion looking how will this reality of living over 100 look like. So we will start with Dr. Roland Eiling, who is Chief Medical and Digital Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President of FIDEA. This is a company, largest independent provider of medical imaging and outpatient services in Europe, acting in 16 countries. And Roland, he's responsible for the clinical governance framework and clinical business development. So he also leads a disruptive digital strategy for the group, focusing on telehealth, you know, another big word, you know, how we introduce healthcare through the distance, and also artificial intelligence. So Roland, please, let's hear your introductory statements.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I'd just like to thank the organizing committee for their kind invitation. As you may notice, I'm the second Brit on stage today. And again, please do not label me badly as a result. I actually live in Budapest in Hungary, so I am officially a resident in the European Union still. My background, as was explained, is actually I'm a clinician, so I trained originally in surgery and then did research and then retrained in radiology and ended up in this kind of hybrid image-guided cancer treatment and looking after an academic network. and then joined Affidea 4 years ago to lead the clinical and digital strategy. When I joined, we had 120 medical centers across 12 countries, and we now have around 250 medical centers across 16 countries. And obviously, this necessitates an enormous amount of data transfer that we take very seriously, and image movement and security. So we'll touch on some of those topics as well. Also, I'm a member of the advisory panels of IBM Watson Health Imaging and Microsoft Health in Cloud. They're non-paid positions, but it's important to note I've got those connections as well. And I'm also a member of the European AI Alliance. So, to the topic in hand. As we said, life expectancy is increasing. And we can see that even over the last 20 years, life expectancy has gone up 7 years. So it's really very rapid increase. And as was also pointed out, there's a difference between the healthy life expectancy and the absolute life expectancy. And so when we consider that gap, we have to think, what does that look like? And this is, of course, assuming that all of the reasons that you may die early have been excluded. So when thinking about life expectancy and averages and how long can we live for potentially, we have to exclude the stupid reasons of death first, those big socioeconomic factors, which I'm sure we will talk about later on in this panel. We know from an economic perspective that it's actually 5% of the population that absorb 50% of the healthcare spend. And that's pretty similar across geographies. That's similar in the States, it's similar in Europe, because 80% of our population is well. They're the ones that can be screened. They're you, actually, the people in the audience. You're the 80% who don't consume healthcare resources. Then there's a 15% that may be living with 1 or 2 medical conditions, but it's manageable, you stay out of hospital, but you have more regular contact. And then there's this 5% who have multiple morbidities, so several different types of illness. You may be hospitalized, in and out, and they consume a lot of resource. Now, how do we make sure that that 80% is aware that they may be deteriorating and may be becoming part of the 15%? How do we stop the 15% entering that 5% barrier? Because that is where the benefits will be made if we are smart and if we're able to predict how people will pass through their health journey. And so, I don't know how well this projects. There are 2 bodies. And on the left is really what we collect today in terms of medical data. So we really only collect around 5% meaningful data about health. And it's generally done in a singular manner. So it's not continuous. They are episodic collections of data. You go and have a scan. Then 5 years later, you go and have another scan. And there's a whole period of time in between where you don't know what's going on. Even when you're healthy, so in the audience, I'm sure even if you go to see a doctor, it's for a checkup maybe once a year. Maybe not even that. You're feeling well, why go? What's the point? But in actual fact, it's keeping the healthy is the most critical piece. And there's also a whole bunch of other data that isn't necessarily being collected for healthcare purposes, but also has a really significant impact on health, psychological well-being, social networks, ability to move around, loneliness, connectivity. All of these other things play into the healthcare space. And of course, most of this data is unstructured at the moment. So although the data is being collected, it's not being connected, and it's not being analyzed in a meaningful way. And this is where the opportunity lies. So, in my opinion, the future is actually data. And it's about risk stratification, knowing where you are, knowing what your risks are, access to accurate diagnostics, patient segmentation, so knowing whereabouts you feel, and then it's really about wellness maintenance rather than sickness care. And especially when we're talking about that elderly group, or when you hit your 80s, how do we maintain that wellness? And here's an interesting story. So we're working with a group called Healthlytics, which is an AI company in America. It's on the West Coast. And they have integrated 2 different information streams. And so they're looking at dementia. And they're looking at genomic screening, so genomic sequencing, and they're looking at AI analytics on brain scans. And so they can take your genome, screen it for its risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, multi-infarct, other various forms of dementia, and give you an absolute risk stratification of where you fall. Then you do a brain scan, and the brain scan gets segmented by AI, and it gets compared to a normal cohort for your age. And so it can either improve your risk or worsen your risk of that particular disease. And only by identifying those at risk can we then treat. But of course, the problem is, can you treat it? And so there are lots of drugs being developed for Alzheimer's treatment, and until we have a good treatment for it, screening may not be necessarily the best thing to do. But early diagnostics will help people then decide. They can cope. It can be caught early, and intervention can take place. Because identification of disease early is critical. If we can catch it at stage 0, then we know that we've got a better chance of turning the corner and not progressing. And again, that's the problem, is things get worse and we don't realize it. Predictive intervention is really important. And when people talk about personalized care, it's quite a sexy topic, personalized medicine. And it's important to realize that personalized doesn't mean it's you. There's not a whole health system built around you personally. What it is actually doing is cohort medicine. So it's actually looking at you and putting you into a grouping with similar people who share your genes, who may share your dietary habits, who may share your social setup, looking to see what's happened to them in order to try and predict what's going to happen to you and what interventions can take place. And here we have other AI tools that are coming into play. So this is a paper from Harvard and from the MIT group, where they're looking at breast density on screening mammography. And so if you take risk factors for breast cancer, you can predict your risk. Look at genetic sequencing, that can predict your risk. And they took X-rays of breasts, mammography, and they worked out through deep learning. There were factors in those scans, those mammography studies, that also independently predicted your risk of breast cancer. But the mammography didn't have breast cancer in it. So these were normal scans, but there were things in the scan which the machine learning detected, which the radiologists couldn't. And this power of data analysis is absolutely amazing. And speaking as a radiologist, I know that radiology is a process of data minimization. We take masses of data. When we do an MRI scan, millions and millions of data points, of which I only see a small number, because it has to be converted into a scan visually, which I then look at. And it's accessing all of this hidden data is going to be critical. So part of what I'm doing is trying to work with big data analysis, working with small startups to see whether we can extract meaningful data out and also see whether we can then use it in the environment. And so this is an example from, again, a paper. This is actually around cardiac pathology. And it shows all of the different inputs. You've got lifestyle inputs, genetics, microbiome. They're the bugs inside your guts, the impact on your health. You've got social media, omics data, proteomics, genomics, everything else, wearable tech, all inputting into your electronic health record, which can then be used and studied by AI to look for meaningful insights. So who are the next disruptors in healthcare going to be? I would argue that, in fact, they're going to be the big players, because they're the ones that have got the computing power. They're the ones that are going to be the supportive infrastructure underneath, because we were talking about how fragmented the EU may be before lunch. I can only tell you that healthcare is even more fragmented. That's not only fragmented on a country level, it's fragmented on a center level. Hospitals don't talk to each other. Centers don't talk to each other. The power of the data is lying untapped. So my question really, so as part of what I'm doing as my clinical role, looking at the business of AI and the business of healthcare, it's not so much does AI work? Okay, so that's a question that some of the undergraduates are looking at in the universities. It's an interesting question, but we know that it does. We have examples of improved risk stratification. So the examples that I'm working with currently, that's not the question. The question that I am now dealing with is who pays for it. And that is a completely different question, which I think we can probably talk about in the panel to come. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll hand back over.
Thank you. So if you could just join the seat at our summary stage. There are a lot of points that I hope we will have time to elaborate today, because these are all very important when thinking about the future. And now I'd like to introduce our second panelist, David Sweeney, who is chair of the Center of Health Law, Policy and Ethics, and adjunct professor of law at the University of Ottawa. So we got the European perspective. Almost European. We are getting now America's perspective, you know, which might be a bit different, but it will overlap a lot since we're still in Western world. So David Sweeney has worked on tobacco and health policy issues since early 80s, and he played a key role in setting a wide range of Canadian and global precedents. And his primary area of work has been the interaction of law and economics as a determinant of public health. And recently, much of his time has been focused on appropriate policies for technologies that can significantly reduce risks to our health and promote our health. So, David, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's lovely to be here. I have a great interest, among other things, in livable cities. Vilnius is very much a livable city. Certainly the center part of Vilnius, as I could see from my runs and my walks since getting here yesterday. When asked to talk about the reality of living past 100 years of age, my immediate thought is, well, my mother turns 96 in a few weeks, and the day before that, my dad turns 98, and he still works full-time. And my dad's older brother is a very active blogger with followers in over 100 countries. I mean, you can... He turns 100 in November. I thought this was a reality. Do we have more stuff to talk about? But I think what I'd like to bring to the table is the role of policy in all of this, because we often look at science issues like it's happening outside of the social context. And the way I look at much of this, and it's my bias as a lawyer, I'm sure, is that science and medicine can tell us why people are getting sick. It can tell us what we might be able to do to extend life, to reduce illness. But dealing with it is a social, legal, political problem. And what can we do that changes policy in a way that promotes health? So how do we get to that sort of reality of having a much longer, healthier life expectancy? And a lot of this, I don't think, is rocket science. I mean, if we look at, you know, what we've already heard about life expectancy doubling, you know, in the last century, you know, globally, we've added between 200 and 300 billion years of collective life expectancy in the last 150 years. If you look at the population we have now, how much longer we're living. That is phenomenal. It's something that, you know, in terms of the history of our species, unprecedented. And how did we get there? Because I think the tendency to believe that this sort of happens magically, or it happens because of, you know, just some scientific breakthrough or some huge area of new technology. About 85% of that increase in life expectancy is from basic public health measures. You know, it's things like vaccination, sanitation, nutrition. And where might we move now with the sort of technology that we have, the things that exist already, and if what we're trying to do is increase that life expectancy? And I think the reality here is that if you're trying to look at where we can make further gains, look at where we made the past ones. So what are the things we can continue to do on basic issues like sanitation, nutrition, healthy lifestyles, the stuff Roland was talking about, the stupid deaths, the people who are dying far before their time for reasons that are entirely preventable. And we've seen so many examples of this, and I would argue that laws played a huge role by setting the policies that can facilitate these sorts of changes. You know, if you want to see a move to sanitary food manufacturing, what are the laws you need to have to incentivize that, to give a marketplace advantage to people who make sanitary food, stuff that isn't going to kill you? How did we move to science-based pharmaceutical products to replace the sort of snake oil products that existed in the 1930s? Well, that was regulation that gave a relative advantage in the marketplace for being able to do these sorts of things. That how do you have risk proportionate regulation? How do you say, yes, there's some things that are bad, there's other things that are way worse? You know, how do we move people down a continuum of risk? And we have the ability to do that. And if we're looking at trying to extend life expectancy, I mean, I think there's all sorts of things we can do going forward to say, what are these new technologies we can capture? How do we create an incentive so that we see those happen? How do people make money doing this? How do you create a business incentive? Because there's a lot of things that we can only do with government intervention, taxpayer money, or philanthropic money. But if you can find a way to create a business incentive, it essentially takes care of itself. That you end up with something that is sustainable and scalable, simply because, you know, if you're selling food, the more of it you sell, the better. If you're selling pharmaceutical products, getting it to more sick people is a good idea. If you look at a market that already exists, how do you replace that market with something else? What did we do with automobiles, for instance, so that the death rate per kilometer driven in a country like mine is down by over 80% since the time I was a teenager? We took technology, we created incentives to get more of that technology into cars, into road construction, and we've seen the results. But I'd also say that if we're looking at breakthroughs, a really good place to start is, where are the deaths? So if we look globally at the deaths this year, roughly 40% of all the deaths that are going to occur on our planet this year are a direct result of cigarette smoking, air pollution, obesity, alcohol abuse, and car accidents. It's 40%. All of those are entirely preventable. Can't get rid of all, but we can probably get rid of a great many of them through technology, creating incentives to do things differently. And we've already seen ways that we can do that with market forces by essentially combining three really simple concepts. You give people enough information to be able to make an informed decision. You give them the ability to act on that information. And to the extent you can, you nudge them. So it's like saying, you know, my main topic in dealing with the carnage from cigarette smoking, I see you're smoking cigarettes. Did you realize nicotine's not the problem, it's the smoke? You can now get something that will give you what your cigarette does without the smoke. It'll vastly reduce your risks of death. And ideally, you want to say, and they're available more readily than cigarettes, they cost much less than cigarettes, you'll get truthful information about them, they don't make you stink, etc. Because you've now given them the information, you've given the availability to act on that information, you've nudged them in some way. So very similar to saying, oh, you know, the disease you're worried about, you can now get a vaccine for it. The vaccine will essentially eliminate your risk of that disease. The vaccine's available right over there at the pharmacy. Oh, and they'll give you a free ice cream cone and go get one today. You know, you're trying to change those behaviors. You can create those incentives. And to the extent that there's a business that can be behind it, it essentially takes care of itself. So again, when we're looking at complicated issues, there's some that are really simple, or should be, if we can get the politics right. So as I said, the 40% of deaths from these 5 preventable causes, cigarette smoking and air pollution sort of being tied at 7 million deaths a year. That's 20,000 people today are going to die from each of those globally. People are spending about $850 billion US dollars equivalent every year buying cigarettes. Cigarettes are a really lethal delivery system for a drug of dependence, a drug that does lots of good things for a lot of people, but in any event, a drug that's going to be used for a long time. The drug itself isn't the problem. It's the delivery system that's the problem. And we know that we can deliver what they're looking for without the smoke. They don't have to constantly inhale smoke. So if we could simply move them to non-combustion forms of delivery, we could largely eliminate the health risk. We already know how to do that. Some countries have. You know, Sweden has very low rates of smoking now because of substitution. They use an oral type of tobacco product called snus. You just stick in your mouth. It has negligible health risks. Japan has had substitutability with heated tobacco products, where a third of their cigarette market is gone in 3 years by substitution. This is the sort of stuff you can roll out because somebody can make money by moving you to a safer product. Just like with automobiles, you can move people to a less hazardous product. How do you incentivize that? How do you give people enough information so they're more likely to say, this is something I want to do? Do the same thing on diet. Do the same thing in terms of auto safety. Give them that sort of information. Give them the ability to act on that information. How do we take the sorts of problems we have now and largely solve it? How do we create greater economic incentives to say, if you think there can be money made in getting people totally off nicotine, that's great. How do we incentivize that if that's what we want to do? And how do we use things like differential taxation? Not just on things like tobacco products, which I've written about with colleagues in the New England Journal of Medicine about 3 years ago, saying, simple concept, but why don't we tax on the basis of relative risk? Why aren't we doing that on other things in terms of unhealthy foodstuffs? What might we be able to do in changing alcohol policy to reduce excess drinking? What might we be able to do to pick up on the technology for products that can give people much of what they get from alcohol without the liver damage? The sort of stuff Professor Nutt in the UK has worked on for years and has had no pickup because there's no economic incentive for anybody to do anything. There's no legislation in place to try to encourage that to happen. And there's no public awareness. If I were to ask this room, how many of you have heard about the stuff that Professor Nutt has come up with as a replacement for alcohol to deal with the hazards of alcohol? There probably wouldn't be a lot of hands that go up. So I think this is typical of what we've seen with technology historically. We have what we need to accomplish great things, and we usually have it for decades before we do anything about it. It's like radio or fax machines. How do we change that? How do we go from the time that it takes a couple of 100 years from the time you figure out what's causing smallpox and the ability to deal with it to the time we eliminate it? How do we use what we now know in terms of technology and communication to speed that process? What are the lessons we can get from a place like Vilnius where the penetration of these heated tobacco products here parallels that in Tokyo of being the greatest of any city anywhere in the world, and Vilnius has done it even faster than Tokyo. Well, why is that? What are the lessons that the rest of the world can learn from what's happening here? And how do we speed that process up? What might be blocking that change here? What other alternative products might we want to make available? What sort of regulatory changes? And again, the incentives. What can you say about the product? Where can it be available? At what price can it be available? Those are the sorts of things that I think if we do that, we can make phenomenal changes very rapidly using the technology we have, while simultaneously looking at what's the sort of regulations we need, and we've seen this happen on research and things like vaccinations. What do you need to do to change the rules of the marketplace, change the laws so as to change the economics in order to get the sort of investments you want to get the health results you're looking for? There's no mystery in how we've doubled life expectancy. There shouldn't be a whole lot of confusion about how we can greatly extend it again. The power is out there in terms of human ingenuity of products we already have, the ingenuity that's going to bring us the next realm of products. We have the ability to speed up that process. And if we do, the sort of gift that we give to humanity is right up there with things like getting rid of cholera, getting rid of smallpox, something that we can do that can greatly increase life expectancy and quality of life. And I think we have it within our grasp. We just have to get the policy right. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very important addition. It's not enough just to find those diseases earlier. It's much easier to avoid them to begin with. And while we in the Western world are just entering the stage where we are thinking, how will we deal with all these societal changes with increasing longevity, looking on the other side of the map, looking in Japan, they have been having these issues for a while now, and they have been solving it. So I think it's very important actually to reactivate these discussions between Western and Eastern world and learn from the good experiences. So I'm very happy that today here we have a Japan ambassador to Lithuania, Shiro Yamazaki, who has been working in the field of health for a very long time. Before being assigned as an ambassador to Lithuania, he served for very long years as a government official in Tokyo. He has joined Ministry of Health and Welfare, working on the relationship with pharmaceutical and life science industries. Then he moved to New York, where again he was promoting trade between Japan and USA in the pharmaceutical and lifetime fields. And after coming back to Japan, for a long time, he has been working to create a new care system, long-term care insurance system targeted at an aging population. And for elderly people, at the moment, about 5 million elderly people in Japan are provided with integrated care of health and social services. And this is very important understanding and talk. I think we'll expand on this. Social care is as important as medical care when we are aging. So I would like to invite to the stage Shiro Yamasaki.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Labadiena, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to inviting here today. So my presentation is about designing a 100-year lifestyle society in Japan. Actually, honestly speaking, I need 1 hour at least to make full presentation, but now there are some limitation of time, so I will give you the short overview. First, I'll explain the situation. I will describe the situation in Japan. The next, I will explain the basic concept of the Japanese strategy, and then I will introduce a silver market. In Europe, I think the color of the elderly people's hair is called the gray hair, but in Japan, we call the silver hair, not gray. The gray sounds so sad and some kind of dark, but the silver have some bright image. We call the silver age. That is actually these people, elderly people, are very, very active right now and also positive that they can create and lead a new market that is recurrent to the education or work and health. Okay, first of all, I'll describe the situation of Japan. This is the aging rate international comparison. Japan has the highest and fastest aging rate in the world. It was 26.6% in 2015, and will be around 38% in the future. On the other hand, some of the other countries, such as Korea or China, are following Japan's trail with 10 to 15 years delayed. What's more, it is expected that those countries' aging will be faster than Japan. Therefore, Japan is a good model for those countries. As for Lithuania, now its present aging rate is 19.6%. It is about 40 years younger than Japan. Therefore, I think that Japan's experience will be very useful for this country. Left graph is life expectancy at birth in Japan. Now it is 81.09 for male, which is the second longest in the world, and 87.26 for female, which is the longest in the world. By 2065, it will be 85 and 91 years, respectively. And right chart was quoted from the slides of the Professor Linda Gratton. As you know, that she is the author of the world best-selling book, The Life Shift. According to her research, 50% of babies born in Japan in 2007 are expected to live until 107 years old. Wow. So more about the other Western countries are in the just about similar situation. 100-year life society is about to come too soon. This graph shows the average life cycle in Japan. In 1920, men Japan worked until around 60 and died in 1 year after retirement. In 2009, the men in Japan worked until 65 and died 16 years after retirement. In a 100-year life society, if people retired at 65, they have 42 years of the post-retirement age. Can you imagine it? I think the era in which live longer, work longer is approaching. This is about the basic concept of the designing of 100-year life society in Japan. It is a transition from 3-stage to multi-stage lives. In 3-stage lives, people finish their education at 22, enter the workforce soon after graduation, and keep working at the same company until they are retire at 65. In 100-year life society, it is impossible for people to live 3-stage lives. The first stage will be related to the education. In order to keep the knowledge and skills updated, expanding the recurrent education is indispensable. Second change is work. We should think about continuous employment. And the third change is regarding the health and the care services. It's a very, very important issue. I think this is a silver market. It consists of these 3 parts. I would like to introduce the current education system briefly. Now that there are several obstacles to obtain the current education, now Japan's government try to expand the opportunity of the recurrent education. Okay, I skipped it. Okay, I move to the work. As for the elderly's work, and this is the international comparison, employment rates of the elderly in Japan are high for both men and women. Left graph shows the percentage of the elder people who are willing to work is high in Japan. According to this survey, about 80% wish to keep working until age 70 and above. Then we found mismatch between the employment rate, real employment rate, and the people hoping to work. In the case of the age 65 to 69, and also the 7 and above. Therefore, it is necessary to take the continuous employment for the elder people. That's a very, very important issue. And next, now let me move to the health matter, health and care services. The other people that mentioned about healthy life expectancy. Actually, Japan is enjoying the long life expectancy. However, when it comes to the healthy life expectancy, there are a big difference from life expectancy. For men, it is 10 years, and female, it's 12 years. It is very, very big, the challenging issue. Therefore, the next goal in Japan must be to improve the healthy life expectancy. In order to realize this goal, the health and the care service for the elderly people is one of the key issues. In the 1980s and 1990s, Japan's health and care system didn't work well. Therefore, the new system, which is a long-term care insurance system, was introduced in 2000. It has provided to about 5 million elderly people integrated care of the medical and the social services. Let me show some of the basic concept of this system. The first is this one. This is a user-oriented system. In the previous system, local government decided everything, service and service providers. In the new system, user can choose any services and any service providers. That is very dramatic change. And third point, deregulation of the service providers. In previous system, service used to be mainly provided by public sector. In new system, services are provided by various associations, especially the private sector, private company, and NGOs. Many private companies started to operate as a service in this time. This is show the total the amount of the care expense is very rapidly increasing. It is now the 10 trillion yen. It was the 83.3 billion euro per year. In fact, this also means that a huge care market is created and still expanding. And right chart is about the service providers. I would like to emphasize that the introduction of the new care system opened the service supply to the private sectors. In the previous system, before 2000, there are almost zero companies, private companies in this area. Nowadays, there are around 20,000 private companies and NGOs are enjoying this market, accounting for the 50% to 70% shared. Many companies are still entering and growing. Recently, the IT industry, the robot industry, the residential industry, the transportation industry are developing the innovative new services by utilizing high technology. Some companies are exporting their service know-how to China and South Asia. Okay, I'll make the wrap-ups. Silver market is currently expanding and regarded as one of the most promising industry in Japan. In 2025, the total amount of the silver market is expected 8.4 trillion euros. I'm conclusion that Japan must be the good model for the super longevity society, and also toward the era of the 100-year life society, lifelong learning and employment is indispensable. And next goal is a healthy life expectancy. For a long time, the goal of Japan's health policy was to extend the life expectancy. Thanks to that, in Japan, with the era of the 100-year life society is coming. Then next goal must be the improved healthy life expectancy. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Let's look a bit more into the economical aspects. You know, we talked about health quite a lot, and quite often when thinking about longevity, we think about health and talk probably not enough about the economic implications. So we have today Laura Galdikene from Bank of Lithuania. She's a principal economist there, responsible for economic analysis and forecasting. She has been working as an economist in banking sector for a while and providing business consulting. And she's passionately engaged in such topics as impact of technological change on the labor market, shifting demographic changes, and sustainable development. So let's hear what challenges are there and what opportunities we have. Laura.
Hello. It's actually a great honor and pleasure to be here today. I think it's a curse to be the last one to speak because all the interesting facts have been given away. And I was planning to start with a quiz. But the correct answer was given away, I think, 3 or 4 times. But I'll still have the quiz, because in this way, you know, I can have you more engaged in the discussion, and I can also check whether you've been listening attentively. So watch out. So my question is, how many years could a person born in Germany in late 1880s expect to live? Don't worry, I'll give you some options to choose from. And I'll ask you to answer by raising your hands. So, option A, just don't raise your hands yet. It's 40 years. B, it's 65 years. And C, it's 80 years. So how many of you would say it's 40 years? Not everyone, that's good. Okay, how many of you would say it's 65? Great, that makes it interesting. And C, how many of you would say it's C? None, okay. Well, the moment of truth. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll start with the C, okay? C, 80 years, it's the current life expectancy at birth in Germany. So it's a little bit above 80. So it's not, obviously not the correct answer. So 65 is not the correct answer either. 65 is actually an age when a person is starting to be called old by the World Health Organization. People at 65 are considered already old. And this is also, it's a most common official pension age across the rich world. Well, most people retire at 65. And 40, well, 40 is the correct answer. People in 1889 could expect to live only 40 years. Why I'm talking about Germany and 1889? Do you have any idea? Well, Germany was the first country to implement public pension system in the world. Could you guess where they set their official retirement age? 70. So, yeah. Why did they do that? Well, not many people could expect to live to 70. Well. So that was good for public finances, I would say. Later on, it was reduced to 65, and this 65 years stuck around the world. So, and across the world, you would most often meet 65 as the official retirement age. So, can you imagine that this retirement age has not changed, although nowadays people can expect to live to 80 years. What were the reasons behind this increase? Of course, these other great panelists could answer this better. One is, of course, one explanation, the reduced children mortality, but that's not the whole story. Because at higher ages, the mortality patterns have changed as well. At 65, nowadays, at 65, people in Germany can expect to live more than 20 more years, 21 to be specific. In France or Spain, these are the front runners in Europe, they can expect to live to 24 years. And even longer in Japan. I'm talking here about women. Well, the situation is a little bit worse for men, but still, since 1970, the situation has changed dramatically. So, should we call these people old? If they can expect to live 20 more years, and they can expect to have quite healthy life, should we call these people old? Okay, but these people don't think they're old. A research in 2009, a survey in 2009, conducted by Pew Research, showed that people at the age of 65, they think that people become old when they are 74. So these people don't think they're old. Moreover, these above 65-year-olds, they want to work longer. Another research showed that the baby boomers in the US, they would continue working even if they won a lottery. So people want to remain mentally active, and it's not just the issue of finances. And technology will enable them to work longer. Even now, companies, especially in the auto industry, they are providing employees with special suits, with metal-framed suits, with motorized muscles that allow their employees to lift heavy stuff. So the importance of physical strength is declining, and now we live in the fourth industrial revolution when all the processes are being automated. So the importance of physical strength is going to decline further. And longevity and health will most likely will continue to improve. A study showed that a cohort born in 1931, only a few % of that cohort survived to 100 years. Of the people born in 2011, 30% will survive to 100. And of the people born that will be born in 2031, 40% will survive to 100, and 10% will survive to 110. This is for UK. So, and I would say this is still a bit pessimistic, so to say. So, but at the same time that we're seeing this massive increase in longevity and healthy life years, we economists are worried about aging. We're worried about aging populations because they may be a burden to the society. And they may, in fact, be. Although longevity is increasing, this may be a burden to the public finances, to the healthcare system, to our pension systems, because we need a paradigm shift. Should we consider these people old that reach 65? If we stop considering them old, every extra year lived, it will mean that there's less aging going on. And there are enormous opportunities provided by longevity that we as a society have not yet fully realized. And I would say that businesses have also not realized these opportunities. So what can longevity do? It could help us to withstand the decline in the working age populations that we're seeing all across the world, and could help fill in those labor shortages and skill shortages that the rich economies are facing right now. Well, I think that the elderly have a lot to offer in terms of experience and skills that they have accumulated in their lives. And I would say that this could, employing more elderly people could even be a boost to company productivity. And there are some good examples. The BMW has redesigned its production line with the help of its employees and has created a production line for people above 50. The productivity has increased by 7%, and absenteeism has declined. This could also be a boost to innovation. Did you know that most of the entrepreneurs are over 50? The people over 50, in their 50s and their 60s, they create new businesses at twice the rate of the people in their 20s. So, and their businesses tend to be more successful. They have a higher success rate. And there are vast opportunities for new business. Bank of America Merrill Lynch calculates that by the end of this decade, consumer spending of those people above 60 will increase to $15 trillion per year. So this is a massive industry. And less than half of companies are including global aging, global demographic transformations into their strategic planning. My time is almost up, so I'll be just really quick. There are, of course, some huge challenges that we'll have to solve in order to make longevity work for everyone. So that's the first one, is the unsustainable public pension systems. Of course, if we keep the rules as they are right now, that were created in 1890, then, of course, longevity is unaffordable. There's also unsustainable break-and-fix healthcare models. The current healthcare models that we have right now, oriented towards fixing something, fixing health, giving the pills, those are unsustainable either. And of course, we'll have to consider what to do about the inequality in health outcomes, because there are huge inequalities in how long people can expect to live depending on their income. So this is a graph for the US. You can see that the difference in life expectancy between the people at the bottom of the income distribution at the top, it's 10 years. So this is amazing. And of course, people that work, well, physical jobs, that have physical jobs, maybe they have routine jobs, they may not want to work longer. So we'll have to deal with these issues. So how can we make longevity work for everyone? Well, first of all, we'll need to redesign the pension systems. We'll probably not be able to provide everyone with an adequate pension as populations age, so we'll need to increase the financial literacy of these people that are currently young but may not be saving enough for the future, and encourage saving for retirement. We need to reduce inequalities in terms of health outcomes. We need to reduce inequalities between men and women in their health outcomes. And we have to move towards preventive healthcare. Well, we have to encourage these 65-plus-year-olds to stay in employment. So we'll need lifetime learning for that. This is an amazing graph, actually, by the OECD, which shows that the share of adults that have no computer experience. And there's a huge gap we'll need to fill between the younger people and the ones that are heading towards the retirement. So Lithuania stands out in here. 50% of 55, 65-year-olds do not have computer experience. So we'll have to adjust our education systems for that. What the older people also need, they need flexibility. So we'll have to find ways to provide flexible work arrangements. And of course, we'll need to fight ageism, so discrimination of older people. But these are only several of my suggestions, and I'm sure that we'll search for more answers in this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, please. So that's the end of our introductory presentations, but I would like to invite another one panelist, who is the European Commissioner for Health and Food Safety, Vytenis Andriukaitis. Hello. Please. So to give a bit of our, a bit more of a policy-making experience, a bit more experience of looking for the future, because Vytenis Andriukaitis have been the head of Lithuanian delegation to the Convention of Future of Europe. So I'm really looking forward for the discussion, and I think we will be able to ask questions from the audience, so keep this in mind and raise your hand if you have one. So I've been, here are the microphones for those without headsets. We are always hearing this magic number, 65, you know? And now we're starting to think about 100 and above 100. So I'm a scientist working with numbers, so I already have this timeline in my head saying, well, but between 65 and 100, we have 35 years. So that means the difference there is the same as 35 and 30. And we don't really mix in any way, in medical way, in policy way, in economical way, these people together, you know. 30 years old, they have different medical needs, they have different economical challenges compared to 50-year-olds. So do we really need to rethink our 65-plus population when we're getting it to 100-plus in all these ways that you have been talking about? Roland, would you like to start?
No, I think that's a fascinating question. I think there's undoubtedly different physiology, and in some ways you don't really need to use chronological age almost. Having a biological age is actually in some ways more meaningful, because you have some exceptionally fit 65-year-olds who work out, they look after themselves, and they can be as biologically healthy as a 40-year-old who doesn't look after themselves. So I think it's quite difficult to put absolute figures around people's chronological age and expect them to conform. And I think, therefore, I can't talk to policy, but in terms of medicine, I think it's very important to personalize that treatment into cohorts of like-bodied and like-minded people in order to address their needs separately. So I think it's very important to treat those groups differently.
So if I would like to ask you to expand a little bit, so what do you think about all these preventive programs that they have? They are now targeted to chronological age. Do you think with big data and with machine learning we'll move away from that and actually will introduce for each person preventive measures when it's needed rather than when they hit a certain age?
I think that would be fantastic. I mean, that would be a dream, as where you could have selected intervention programs based on your own risk. And therefore, if you're a woman and you have regular breast screening with mammography, in actual fact, it may be that you actually need yearly MRI, for instance. Because if you have risk factors and if your genetics predispose you, maybe in order to keep healthy, that's what you require. But if you don't have the risk factors, maybe you don't need 2 yearly mammography. Maybe you can have 5 yearly mammography. So again, I think there are implications about use of resources, where at the moment, health systems spend the same amount based upon age, and I think selected expenditure for selected cohorts may be more meaningful. But it goes back to the data, and it goes back to meaningful data and fragmentation of data, and can we identify those groups? And I think with the disparate health systems that we have, where everything is not connected and talking to each other, to identify those at risk is very challenging. And also, it's often the least able to look after their own health, the most deprived, that have the worst access to healthcare and the preventative programs. So it's how you make, in a society, a meaningful distribution of those resources. And again, I guess that's been explored in Japan already, and in terms of the health economic side, that would be a very interesting bit to explore, because I think that has a meaningful impact on how governments go about their health spend and looking after their population.
Thank you. David, what was your...
Yeah, I think one of the really key things is, you know, meeting people where they are. And we talk about this in public health and so often, and then we completely ignore it when we get to areas of interventions in policy. And there's a tendency to think that we're there to tell people what to do rather than listen to them and find out what do they want. And ageism is rife in this field. I experienced it a few years ago at a meeting in the UK where somebody said, let me show you what the people in our department came up with. And it was this message about encouraging elderly people to keep moving, to get up in the morning. Sure, you can do it. Just try a little harder. It was aimed for people over the age of 50 because it was written by people who are in their 20s. And it was incredibly offensive to those of us who are over 50. And then we thought, is this what we're saying to people over the age of 70? Ask them what they want to do. You know, how do you feel when you find out that, you know, a retirement home has decided stationary bicycles will not be allowed in case somebody falls off? Well, has anybody asked the residents whether they're willing to take that sort of risk? I think that we have to avoid the top-down stuff because health comes from being empowered. The sort of stuff that the World Health Organization has talked about from the Ottawa Health Charter, of empowering people to make better decisions about their own health. Listen to them. It is really offensive when somebody says, you have to quit smoking, and I'm going to tell you right now, and you just better do it. Or you have to lose weight. Or you have to start exercising more. Well, what are the options available to somebody, and what can you do for them? What is it they're looking for, and are you providing that? And often it's, to quote General Patton, where he said, no such thing as obstacles, only new opportunities. Often the things we see as being a barrier to health is an opportunity. And it's one of the things I really like about where you can commercialize some of these things, create an incentive for someone to find a way to solve a problem. At a time where, for instance, loneliness is just a huge problem, and people just not keeping their minds active. And you talk to a lot of older people who are in retirement homes, and they're looking for things to read. In a country where the magazine and newspaper business is going down the tubes because there aren't enough people getting them, but nobody's thinking, what about mass subscriptions to these people with loads of disposable income who just happen to be elderly and would prefer reading things in paper rather than on the internet? I mean, there's an opportunity. But there's just so many possibilities like that. And I think that's where we need to be reaching out to people, meeting where they are, recognizing they're human beings, treat them the way we'd want to be treated by people 35 years younger than us.
Thank you. That's really important, because this is noticeable that we start to treat elderly people who are aging, we start to treat them as kids. And I think it's very offensive, and it's very counterproductive, actually. And we can see it in families, and we can see it in policy. And we have to keep this in mind when thinking what to do. So what about Japan? Have the attitudes been changing? Are you still bulking all these 65 plus in one bucket? Or do you actually have different approaches to different age brackets?
In my personal experience, when I was young, at 20 or 21, I saw that 65 was so weak and so very, very elderly and protected the people. But now that I'm over the 60, so I did dramatically change the mind. Actually, the physical and mental performance of the elder people, they're getting dramatically improving. So of course, we should change the system about such as the pension, the healthcare. Now this is established maybe 50 years ago. So long time, so right. But we think the cope with the changing of the situation of the people, especially elder people. Actually, the elder people actually in Japan, we had a baby boomer. Baby boomer now, it's a main baby boomer is over 65. They are leader of the the market, especially the tourists. In last year, we had a Japanese tourist from Japan in Lithuania. The total number is 30,000. Almost them are senior. They're very rich. They paid money for the invest in this country. And also, I think that we should be. They're very active, and so they're very positive. The people. So we should change mind.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I was interested in your presentation saying that part of what you would do, the move from a state-led system to the system that you've adopted involves a lot around engagement. So to that point around being proactive in that bracket to engage with the health services. How did you manage that in Japan? What did you do to engage that cohort of people that may not be digitally literate? How did you go about doing that?
Well, how the government was, the social system?
Yeah, so what measures did you take to try and get engagement? Because I think that's a big problem, certainly, looking at it across Europe. There's a disengagement and also a lack of inclusion. And I'd be very interested to know how we in Europe could learn to encourage more of the 65 plus bracket to engage in their own management of healthcare.
Okay, I can tell the suitable example or not, but about the long-term care system. So the previous system, the government or in the private sector decide everything. There are no, the right, the senior people cannot select any service because we saw the senior people, they have no ability to choose the services on the service provider. But we changed the system with we think that the senior people can make right decision to use this good service to make their life, or we so-called previous system, the very centralized system. So everything that managed by government or private sector, that was a big problem for us. So we changed the user-oriented system.
Thank you. So what we hear, we hear about disposable income, and we hear it in Western world, we hear it in Japan as well. So Laura, are we targeting that disposable income, looking from the point of economics?
You mean in terms of business?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just noted in my presentation, there's this huge market to be taken. And McKinsey, I think that was McKinsey forecast that over the next couple of years, people over 60 will be the main drivers of economic growth in the world. So few people, not many companies take this into account. I just noticed yesterday an interesting fact that Nielsen, the company Nielsen, they said that only 5% of only 5% of the advertising is targeted towards elderly people, so towards people over 65. Well, they are the people that have the money, they have the resources, and this will be a growing business. Half of the urban consumption will come from elderly people. So, and this is a huge market in healthcare. This is the most obvious, but also in housing. This is in leisure, cosmetics. All these areas that are not being not being taken. These opportunities are just right there and not being taken. So I think there are huge opportunities for the businesses, and those businesses do not incorporate these demographic shifts into their business strategies. They may lose out to their competitors that are doing this.
And probably that's another reason to introduce people above 60 or above, 30, who's working in marketing agencies at the moment. They are marketing, everybody's marketing for themselves. We see the world through our own eyes. So without having elder people working in businesses and marketing, it will be really difficult to target these markets.
This is a great point you're noting. Most of the people that I know that are working in marketing, they are Generation Y or Z. They don't think about the baby boomer generation. They're making commercials to themselves and maybe using the channels that, maybe the elderly people don't use that often. And that's why I would say that the successful businesses will have to include elderly people into their teams, because we can get the best results in intergenerational teams. And we'll have to have these above 65-year-olds in our teams if you want to reach them. So that's an important point.
Yeah, no, in terms of that marketing to the over 50s bracket, in the US, there's a company that was set up called Human Longevity Incorporated. And I don't know if you know about this company, but basically it does whole body screening, so whole genome screening, scanning. And when they set up a few years ago, they were charging $25,000 US for a screening program to keep people alive. And they've dropped the prices subsequently. I think it's now about $5,500 for that package, but that is being totally marketed at the rich over 50s who want to live longer, healthier, and that's the segment they're going for. And Stanford are working with Google, in fact, our Google colleagues still here, to do a similar thing pro bono. So they're actually, they're looking at a cohorts going through, and they're getting all of their medical bills paid for as long as they submit to screening, genetic testing, regular follow-up, to look at those cohorts going over time, to try and do that stratification, to look at what impact those life choices make on health overall. So I think there is something going on, but it's very much stateside, and I haven't seen anything similar to that so far in Europe.
So what about Europe? Yeah, we're getting back to Europe. So what are the initiatives, what are the plans actually closing this gap and actually going towards this longevity? How will we, European Union, tackle it?
On one hand, it's a very simple question, for another, very difficult. First of all, let me start with your idea about need to change paradigm. Paradigm change. Now is time about changing paradigm. What does it mean, health? Health is a status of social, mental, and physical well-being point, not merely disease or infirmity, is definition of WHO. And when we are speaking about health, it means that we are speaking about possibilities to keep people as healthy as possible, as long as possible. Not thinking about care and health care, because it's the second one issue. From the beginning, we should draw attention. We need to understand that we all societies have their healthy resources, a healthy aging. It was idea. It was signed by all 20, of course, voluntary basis, by all 28 member states to have idea to develop policies using health in all politics, using different public health instruments, including investment in health, including investment in preventative measures. You know, I always repeat 4 Ps: prevention, promotion, protection of health, not cure and care. Sorry, not about diseases. That's first stop. And then participation. Participation in those ideas, in implementation. And this investment forum is one of the participatory actors. We need to invite you to participate in health businesses, in investment, in empowering citizens. You know, I have app, you know, my phone. What it is? It's about health. Yeah, I ask you to be smart, to propose much more apps to support people to understand their health status, to monitor their health status on everything, not only about screening of cancers, no. It's about possibilities to follow your health resources every day and to help understand where you are. And it is about a whole life approach, starting with children, finishing with very elderly. We need to help citizens to be empowered about understanding of health, not about cure and care, sorry. And it is about silver economy also. It's the same. We need to encourage businessmen to think about healthy cities, healthy schools, healthy nutrition, healthy transport, healthy air, healthy environment, healthy kindergartens. A lot of projects, and you know how many projects do we have in our European Union investment funds, speaking of possibilities to intensify issues to find or translate public health instruments into practice, inviting businessmen to do it. Because we need to do more, you know, but otherwise inequalities in health persist. Now we have 53 million Europeans now, today, which can't afford food every second day. Now in Europe, 153 million Europeans are in poverty. And they need to attention from your side, because many of them are oldest part of generation. They are silver, they are part of silver economy. I can continue and continue because every day my business is to fight against risk factors, to introduce many, many regulatory frames addressing alcohol, sugar, trans fats, salt, tobacco, and so. But it is population response. But we need to do more translating health in all policies at national level, at local level, and at business level. We need to invest in health resources much more. Thank you.
Very important. Thank you. That's a very important point that we hear and we've heard before about the inequalities as well. Because healthcare on the wider scale is getting more and more expensive. It's getting better, but it's more expensive as well. Roland, you wanted to add something?
No, I think in terms of I agree with everything you've just said. I think that's all absolutely, couldn't agree any more. I think that there are some barriers to overcome, certainly in Europe, because we haven't talked yet about GDPR and data sharing, and that requires active participation of people to actively want to share their data to networks. And it also relies on, I said, we talked a little bit about fragmentation of healthcare, so not having healthcare in silos, becoming more networked. And if we talk about the networking, as the last presentations were about, and about moving to cloud, it's about trust then, about who do you trust your healthcare data with, and ensuring that the systems that you put your healthcare data on your phone into, you are happy that they are trustworthy setups. And again, I think a lot of the big cloud providers that I mentioned, so certainly Microsoft and Amazon, I'm assuming Google as well, are, they're HIPAA, high trust compliant, and GDPR compliant now. But I think having reassurance as a patient that the systems you're loading your data into are secure is also critical.
David?
Yeah, I'd also say that really important that often these discussions we end up talking about health care rather than health. Health care is very expensive. I think health care also has become a temple. The way that historically people went to a temple to get protection for their souls, we now have people going to a temple to get protection for their health or their finances or their legal needs. The various temples that we defer to thinking they will take care of me. I think we need to destroy those temples. Maybe we need a reformation on other issues now. That I think it's a really interesting mental exercise to say, what would do a town or a city more good? Having a new hospital with tertiary care, or having good bicycle infrastructure, having a nice park system, having nice streets to walk on. What does more good, a new surgery opening or a coffee shop? In terms of what are the causes of ill health and what can we do about it? And I think thinking things more broadly. Health isn't something a doctor does to you or for you. Health is something that is inherent in the choices you make for yourself. And how do we move away from the things that shocked me when I was initially in legal practice, back in the days when there were legal secretaries, to find legal secretaries who tended to be young and had incredibly unhealthy lifestyles. And when I talked to them about their diet, their lack of exercise, their smoking, their view is, well, that's not up to me. That's doctors take care of that. They deferred to the idea of a temple. If my car breaks down, there's a mechanic I take it to. That's not my fault. If my body breaks down, a doctor will fix it. I think that's a really dangerous view. I think the idea of how do we get people to be empowered to say, I'm taking care of this myself, the way when I meet people from places like the Netherlands and say, hey, you're in pretty good shape. Do you work out? And they say, no, I never exercise. And I say, how do you get to work? I ride my bicycle. How far is it? 15 kilometers each way. Well, that's health. And those are the sorts of things that we can empower. And I think that's where we need to focus policy, because that's really inexpensive. And then look at the areas where somebody can make money by doing something that's healthy in terms of more nutritious food, alternatives to cigarettes, alternatives to alcohol, safer automobiles, a whole lot of different things that are going to be sustainable, scalable, a far healthier environment. But think much more holistically about what we can do.
Thank you. Unfortunately, Roland, this is not allowing us to talk any longer, Maybe we'll continue the discussion hidden somewhere behind the stage. Just to wrap up, one thing, one challenge that we need actually to start working on. We just go other way around now. We'll start from Commissioner.
My answer is very simple. Paradigm change. please think about health as big investment, because now we are in Baltic Investors Forum. And please look at our website, how many projects do we have related to investment in different areas, promoting, preventing, and protecting health resources. And I will be more than happy to share our experience and good practices together with you, allowing Lithuania to be championing country in implementation of health in all political sectors.
Thank you. Laura?
Well, that's easy one. That's an easy one. I would say we have to redesign our public pension system. Otherwise, we cannot afford longevity. It's easy as that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to emphasize one word there. You mentioned the prevention is very important. The most effective way to prevention is keeping work. That's my word.
Thank you.
And given that this is an investors forum and investing has been a huge hobby of mine for a long time, which is why I can afford to be as obnoxious as I am, I think there are huge opportunities out there that are staring us in the face. They always have been. People are going to make very large sums of money doing really simple things that lead to an empowered, healthier population. We need to be thinking in those terms.
I'm actually going to say something different. I'm going to answer Rolandus's question at the beginning, saying, is there something specific as a result of this panel? And I'm going to say yes. It's not too late for us. We can still make a change.
Thank you so much. That was a great discussion. Thank you.